We are live now.
A very good morning to our stupendous audience. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. This famous quote by Helen Keller is most suited for all the freedom fighters who gifted us independence by sacrificing their lives. Some of these warriors are highly acclaimed, but unfortunately, a few have not been recognized for their sacrifices. One such hero is Dr. Saifuddin Kitchlew, who was an Indian freedom fighter, barrister, politician, and later of the peace movement. On behalf of History Department of Postgraduate Government College for Girls, Sector 42, Chandigarh, I welcome you all to a very informative webinar on Kitchlew, a catalyst of national unity. We all are here to celebrate Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, India at 75. It would not be an exaggeration to state that this webinar is a very special endeavor from our team to raise a curtain on one of the unsung freedom fighter, Dr. Kitchlew. We all know him just as a freedom fighter who is hailed as the hero of Jalyawala Bagh, but probe unravels the versatile facets of his sparkling personality. An academician par excellence, he fought fervently for India's independence, so much so that he left his legal practice after getting swayed away by Gandhiji's ideals and freedom movement propositions. This hero went out of the way to leave an indelible imprint in innumerable fields during struggle, and even during post-independence era, he continued his efforts and inculcated the spread of peace. Though much less acclaimed and applauded, he is still in the hearts of loved ones. Kitchlew Nagar in Ludhiana, named after him, and stamp launched on his name by Government of India will help us to treasure the memories of this commander rank warrior of freedom struggle. This hero continued with courage, fortitude, and determination to achieve his goals. मेरे जज्बातों से इस कदर वाकिफ है मेरी कलम, मेरे जज्बातों से इस कदर वाकिफ है मेरी कलम, मैं इश्क भी लिखना चाहूं तो इनकलाब लिखा जाता है, मैं इश्क भी लिखना चाहूं तो इनकलाब लिखा जाता है. Last but not the least, my gratitude is due for our revered principal ma'am, who has found us worthy of presenting our contribution in the ongoing national drive, which will be a feather in the cap for the series of events which would go on and on till India's 75th anniversary. Now, I would request our esteemed principal ma'am to enlighten us and present an insight about today's webinar. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank
Over
you,
to you,
Harmi.
principal ma'am.
A very good morning to the worthy audience. We all know that Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav is a series of events to be organized by the Government of India to commemorate the 75th anniversary of India's independence. Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji has launched this endeavor, which will continue till August 15, 2023.
Okay. Very soon, ma'am will be there. There is some problem with the network, so please bear with us. She'll be back within a short period.
So, as University from Punjab University, Jalyawala, the top university in Delhi as well as in history, and received university gold medals respectively. She was awarded Chancellor's Gold Medal for academic excellence by the said university. She received her PhD degree in 1996. She has been the University Degree Research Fellow, and since 1993, she has been in the regular government service in various colonies of Punjab. She joined the Department of History in the University of Chandigarh in the year 2000. Her area of specialization is modern Indian history with a special reference to British monarchy and social political history of India, including Punjab. She has authored 3 research books. She has authored the book entitled The Precious States, British Paramountcy and International Administration, 1858-1948, Case Study of Public Policy, published by National Book Organization, New Delhi in 2001. She has authored the book entitled British Paramountcy in Jaipur History, 1818 up till 2001. Sorry, 1905, published by Manak Publication, New Delhi in 2010. Besides, she has co-edited the book entitled
Due to some technical reason, voice of Hindu sir was not clear. We are doing it again. Sorry for the technical glitch. Just a second, we are trying it again. Disha ma'am is there. I think her connection also lost. आ रही है आवाज? मुझे सर को पूरा अपने फोन से करना है.
If ma'am, you can hear me, then we can proceed. And whenever ma'am's connection is, we can, yeah.
You can start. Yeah.
Yeah. Professor Nisha Agarwal, the principal of the college, Professor Poonam Agarwal, the dean, Dr. Harmeet Sethi, head Department of History, Dr. Parnendu Ranjan, Dr. Sheena, Dr. Preeti, dear colleagues, students, members of organizing committee, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. My sincere gratitude are due to Professor Nisha Agarwal for this kind invitation to me and for giving me the occasion and opportunity to interact with you all today. Kitchlew, the catalyst of national unity. This topic is really important because, as Dr. Harmeet has pointed out, the topic and the personality has not yet entered much into the historical scholarship. And therefore, it becomes very pertinent to know more about the personality, to know more about his activities, to know more about the organization and movement which was launched by Kitchlew. And that is why I have chosen this topic to commemorate 75 years of India's independence. It is a tribute to our national movement, and it is a tribute to the national heroes like Kitchlew. This webinar has been organized, and I have been given this opportunity to speak about this personality. So thank you very much, Dr. Harmeet Sethi and her organizing team, under the patronage of Professor Agarwal, the principal, that this webinar has been organized today. Kitchlew is very well known for his fearless and powerful, effective speeches that he made during the national movement for anti-British propaganda and also for effecting the national unity among the Muslims, the Hindus, and the Sikhs. He is particularly known for his activities in Punjab and also for the national movement throughout India. To quote him, even for the smallest trifles, we must show that India is united, unquote. These are the words of Saifuddin Kitchlew, which reverberated throughout the galleries of the nation during the national movement of India. Kitchlew stands before us as a fearless and uncompromising freedom fighter, who is also acclaimed as the hero of Jalyawala Bagh for his seminal and very instrumental role that he had been playing for effecting the national unity among the people and for steering the national movement in Punjab. He possessed masterly oratory skills with which he aroused the sentiments of the Hindus, the Muslims, and the Sikhs alike to stand for national unity. Born in Amritsar in 1888, Kitchlew received his primary and secondary education in the hometown before he shifted abroad for the higher education, and he received his BA degree from Oxford, Bar at Law from London, and PhD from Germany. In 1915, he returned Amritsar and he settled down here as a barrister and he started practicing law. But simultaneously, he engaged himself seriously into the social and political activities here. He began to organize youth, and he began to organize them in such a way so that the spirit of national unity could be fostered among them. He made efforts for the liberation of the country from the British yoke. His call for the national unity was made loud and clear in his speech, which he delivered on 13th Feb 1919 in Amritsar, in which he compared the nation with the human body. He said that as the different limbs unite together to form the human body, so are the Hindus, the Muslims, the Sikhs. They have to unite together to make a nation. So he had been giving the emphasis on the national unity right from the beginning, and he had been making the endeavors, the sincere endeavors to bring that national unity among the people of Punjab. He considered Rowlatt bills as the Kala Nag, which were meant to bring the destruction and only the destruction. Bills, if passed, he said, shall invite such a powerful agitation from the United Indians that the laws like these would be rejected by the united people because they were so forceful. And even the laws more stringent and rigid than these would be rejected by the people of India. Leading anti-Rowlatt agitation, Kitchlew offered himself in March 1919, the silent agitation or satyagrah, just like Gandhi. He did not bother about any punishment which was awarded to him for his activities because of the simple reason that he was ready to accept any punishment. He had to work for the nation. That was his motto. That was his agenda. And that was his work. So during the course of the public mobilization, he explained to the people what did these bills mean for them. He said, if charge was framed against any Indian suspect, his trial will be held in camera. No evidence shall be placed before him. And what the British planned by doing this was the short shrift. This is how he was mobilizing the people. Kitchlew openly and very fearlessly asked the British the justification for proposing these bills because he made an observation that no penal code or criminal procedure code in the entire world embodied the provisions which had been made and proposed in these bills in India. Amidst all the protests, and despite of all the protests, one of the two bills, they got passed under the name Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act 1919, according to which all the anarchical offenses were to be tried by a court of 3 high court judges. In such trials, the offenders would not have any right to appeal, and they could be detained continuously for as long as the officials wanted. Under this act, the provincial government of Punjab was also given the liberty to search a place, arrest the suspect without any warrant, and keep him in confinement on its own terms and conditions. Kitchlew, of course, had to organize the mass protest against the Rowlatt Act, and this is what he did. He organized the mass protest with passive resistance always. He appealed to the masses that they must take to the satyagraha vows, that they must stand united in their struggle against this act, that they must keep fasts, and that they must resort to the non-violent methods in their struggle. All these programs were in consonance of the Satyagraha program of Gandhi. He assured the public that government could not harm them. The government could not arrest them because they did not have the sufficient accommodation either in the jails or in their bungalows to keep them as the prisoners. He made the people realize that whatever hopes had been formed from the British authorities had simply belied all those hopes. And all these hopes had been frustrated to the ground. And therefore, there was the need for the action. There was the need for the civil resistance. There was the need for the political consciousness in the minds of the Indians, and especially in the minds of the Punjabis, that they must propagate against the British, that they must take action against the British authorities. Several protest meetings under his leadership were held between 31st January to 29th March 1919 in Amritsar. And according to him, all these meetings were highly constitutional. About his own speeches, which were made from time to time during this period, he said that his speeches were all, in his own words, moderate and sober, which did not intend to intimidate either the Hindus or the Muslims or the Sikhs or the masses. Gandhi gave the call for the nationwide Hartal on 30th of March against Rollet Act. The date, however, was postponed to 6th of April, but the news of the postponement of the date reached Amritsar and many other towns late. And as a result, we see that a meeting was held in Amritsar on 30th March, and the masses, they were appealed among the leaders by Kitchlew that they must resort to the non-violent methods in their protest, in their peaceful protest against the Rollet Act. Another meeting of approximately 40,000 people was held in the afternoon in Jalyawala Bagh on the same day, where Kitchlew moved a resolution against the Rollet Act, and it was passed in this meeting. The editor of Waqt, he was amazed to see the discipline and the national unity which was maintained during this meeting. And he observed that Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, they all were present in the meeting to listen to their leaders, to respond to their call, and to follow their agenda, their program, how they should proceed forward. In the concluding remarks, Kitchlew had said, I quote, "We will be ever prepared to sacrifice personal over national interests. All countrymen should become prepared for resistance," unquote. So he is making the appeal for the national unity, which he knew was very important and without which the nation was likely to crumble at the hands of the British. Apart from Amritsar, he had been engaged in the social and political activities in Jalandhar, Lahore, and Gujranwala. Everywhere in his meetings, in his addresses, he had been making the appeal for the national unity and united national resistance against the unjustifiable acts and the measures of the British. He called out for the Hindu-Muslim unity at a conference which was held at Jalandhar on 1st April 1919. And he said that he was a Hindu and he was the Muslim at the same time. He was a Hindu because his ancestors were the Kashmiri Pandits. And he became a Muslim because his ancestors embraced Islam many generations back. To quote Kitchlew himself, we are, within quotes, we are one descendants of the same Buzurgs. Buzurgs are the ancestors. No matter what religion we have now adopted. For the interest of India, we should not forget that the fact that we are all Indians and real brothers to each others, irrespective of religious differentiations, and unite in the noble cause of India. Unquote. The very presence and the very rule of the British over the Indians suffocated Kitchlew the most. To quote him again, "Look at me. I am a Kashmiri Brahman. My blood, my bones, all belonging to this soil where the foreigner rules. This is my home, but he is its master. Unquote. So, being the member of the branch of the Congress, he had attended the All India Congress session, and he made a request that its session should be held in Amritsar, and his request was then accepted. Responding to the call of Gandhiji for Hartal on 6th April, in Amritsar we see that it was observed with all sanctity, where we see that all shops were shut down and the entire business was suspended. A meeting was held in the afternoon at Jalyawala Bagh on this day, where the resolutions against Antirollet Act and also against the restriction made on the public speeches of Kitchlew had been passed. The Hartal was a complete success. The national unity on this day became the established fact, and Ram Navami was celebrated soon on 9th of April as the National Solidarity Day under the leadership of Kitchlew and Dr. Satyapal. Both the leaders, they were arrested and they were deported to Dharamsala, which provoked and agitated the masses. The masses, in order to demand the release of their leaders, they marched from Hall Bazaar to the residence of DC, but they were stopped at a picket where the firing was done on them and which killed a few. The non-violent crowd then became violent, naturally as a reaction. And we see the telegraph lines and the railway stations were attacked by the crowd after this. The point here is to be noted that the crowd was silent, the crowd was peaceful, the crowd was non-violent, but the action of the British made them violent. So the railway goods yard was also stormed, and a few Europeans, including Gord Robinson, Stewart, and Scott, they were beaten to death. Simultaneously, some buildings and the godowns were set on fire. The British authorities panicked with the violence of the crowd, and they immediately took care of their families who were shifted to a safer place. The incidents of the violence were soon followed by Jalyawala Bagh Massacre, a tragedy which took place on the day of Baisakhi on 13th April 1919 at the orders of General Dyer, who had been specially called from Jalandhar to take the action and who had ordered the indiscriminate firing on the innocent people who had gathered in Jalyawala Bagh to protest against the British authorities. Hundreds of people were killed and many thousands were wounded in the tragedy, and which became the butchery, which is referred to as a butchery of General Dyer. And Kitchlew and Satyapal, the leaders at this time, had already been shifted to Dharamshala. So the people are not left at this time by the leader. But here I would again like to mention that in the absence of Kitchlew, his portrait was hung, at this meeting of Jalyawala Bagh, where the different leaders addressed the audience, the people who had gathered there. And in absentia, he was actually leading the people. So the next important movement in which Kitchlew was involved was the Khilafat Movement, which also had been launched at this particular point. The Central Khilafat Committee with several branches had already been formed to take up the issue of the Khilafat, and they all had been condemning the dismemberment of the Khilafat, and they had been agitating against this issue, and their sentiments were provoked against the British authorities, again, who had taken the stand, which was neither with the Hindus nor with the Muslims. And now all the people had realized well that they must unite together on the question of Khilafat. And therefore, Gandhi also took opportunity to unite the people at this time. And he took up the Khilafat question. And this question later on then got merged into the non-cooperation movement. So we find that the Hindus and the Muslims, they united together in their concerted effort to deal with the British authorities under the leadership of Gandhi and Kitchlew and others. So we find that the speeches, they were made and the resolutions were passed in favor of the Khilafat. And a resolution was also passed at Khilafat conference, which was held at Amritsar in December 1919, in which a deputation consisting of the Hindus as well as the Muslim representatives was formed, which then met the Viceroy. And the Viceroy was informed in a very, very categorical manner that if the peace terms did not favor the Muslim sentiments, this will cause and put the undue strain on the Muslim loyalty. We find that Kitchlew and Gandhi, in order to propagate for Khilafat issue, they made the tours, the Khilafat tours of the various towns of Punjab, especially in Amritsar and Lahore. They addressed the audience and they tried to popularize the Khilafat movement. Commemorating the first anniversary of Jalyawala Bagh on 30th of April 1920, we find that Kitchlew addressed the audience by saying that this was the most blessed day which laid the foundation of the Indian nationalism, and therefore it should be recognized and hailed by all the Indians. Kitchlew, Gandhi, Motilal Nehru, and many other leaders, they made the joint statement in which they said that Jalyawala Bagh should be converted into a park and it should have the memorial in the commemoration of all those people who had become the martyrs, in the Bagh due to the fury of Dyer on 13th April 1919. So they wanted to perpetuate the memory of the martyrs, those innocent people who had been lost, and simultaneously they wanted it to be a symbol of Hindu-Muslim unity, where the people, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, in large numbers, they had gathered in Jalyawala Bagh. Kitchlew moved the Non-Cooperation Resolution in May 1920, which was passed. And he said that this resolution was meant for the self-respect of the Muslims and also for the preservation of the prestige of nation as well as their Hindu brethren. So again, this occasion was taken and was used by Kitchlew to effect the national unity among the people. The resolution, of course, was accepted by the Central Khilafat Committee, and the Khilafat question, he said, was not merely the question of the Muslims, but it was the question of 33 crores of Hindustanis. This is something that he had been reiterating in his speeches again and again, because this shows how much was he concerned for the Hindu-Muslim unity, and he had been emphasizing on this aspect in almost most of his addresses and the speeches in a very, very vociferous manner. Khilafat movement, we find, got merged into the non-cooperation, and it was not only truly against the government, said Kitchlew, rather he said it was also against all those people who did not support the nation. So those who were perhaps who had aligned with the British for their own interests and for the reasons best known to them only also. So he made an appeal that people must unite together, must follow the program of non-cooperation, must take the program of Khilafat, and together with the concerted efforts, they could bring a lot of change and they could even have the potential force to shun the British out of the country. Kitchlew held the view that None of the religions ever teach hatred of anybody. And this is something that the communities, that the members of the various communities must take lesson from. They must unite together because there is the cultural affinity among the people, because they all were alike exploited by the British, the foreign masters over here, who would give the primacy to their imperial interests, to their colonial interest, and they would exploit the colony of India and its people to the best possible limits. The leaders of Khilafat movement slowly and slowly got busy by making the boycott program and the agenda successful, which led to the relegation of the Khilafat agitation. In 1923, Kitchlew had proposed the dynamic scheme to uplift the Muslims for their social and economic as well as cultural uplift. And he, in his efforts, wanted to seek the cooperation of Jamaat ul Ulema as well as Central Khilafat Committee. What he desired at this time was that there should be the respectable place given to the Muslims. And for this, he wanted to take up the social activities for them, and he wanted to form an organization for them. And in consonance with the scheme and taking ahead and spearheading the scheme, we find that Kitchlew in 1923-24 inaugurated Tanzim, which was the movement as well as the organization at the same time, and which published the Urdu daily called Tanzim, from which the name came. So the Hindus as well as the Sikhs, he said, already had such organizations, but the Muslim did not have one, which was required for their regeneration, for their social, economic, and cultural uplift. And for starting this organization, he borrowed many of the organizational aspects from Akali movement. He was inspired by the Akali movement and their program. So he borrowed the skills from that movement. And what he desired was he wanted to develop the popular resistance among the Muslims against the British authorities. And he wanted to form what is called the competent authority, the competent force among the Muslims, so that they could offer a tough resistance to the British and could plunge themselves wholeheartedly into the national movement. The steering of Tanzim movement, does not suggest that he deviated from the program of national unity. Rather, we find that Kitchlew was often pained to see the Hindus and the Muslims at disputes, at mutual conflicts. And what he observed was that the main reason of the conflict and the disputes between the Hindus and the Muslims was not religious at all. It was more of the economic reason, which made them do that, which made them have their conflicting interests. The reason for this was seen due to the fact, because of the economic factor, and that economic factor was that the Hindus, according to him, they held the prime positions of trade because they were handling and controlling the trade and majority of the services. So he found Muslims to be little backward, and he wanted the regeneration of the Muslims, and he wanted to work for them so that they got the equal opportunities as the Hindus in the economic fields, so that they could also compete well, in their economic activities, and could improve their economic lot. So that was the only motive, and that was the only aim, the prime aim and the ultimate aim with which he had founded Tanzim. But he asserted again and again in the course of his speeches and in the course of his writings that, Tanzim was only the non-political and non-sectarian movement. That was his reiteration of the fact that he said during the course of his speeches again and again. So Tanzim only aimed at opening the maktabs, the schools, the colleges, the technical institutions, so that the best kind of the educational facilities could be extended to all the Musalmans. And Tanzim also aimed at reorganizing the mosques, and it aimed at encouraging the Muslims to take up the economic activities, to take up especially trade and other such professions, and also to form the cooperative societies so that they are at par with the other communities, they could compete well in the economic sphere, and they could also avail of all the opportunities in which they could prove their worth. That was the motto with which, he had founded Tanzim, and he had spearheaded Tanzim as a movement. As a protagonist of Tanzim, this is again not to suggest that Kitchlew had become a communalist and that the communist interests to him had become paramount and they took primacy over the national interests. So this was not the case at all, because as he said, he saw and he worked for Tanzim only as the non-political and the non-communal movement and the organization. So Tanzim, he said, was only meant for the regeneration of the Muslims, and it was meant to infuse the spirit of humanity among the Muslims. So, but his organization and all his works, achievements done for Tanzim, they were seen with suspicion and with the feeling of resentment and hatred by many of the national leaders, including C.R. Das, Motilal Nehru, Madan Mohan Malviya, who protested against Tanzim and the program of Kitchlew, which was being done for Tanzim and for the regeneration of the Muslims. But I would again like to make a mention of the fact that all these protests against him for Tanzim did not deter him from working for the national unity, the cause for which he stood always. And he had always been working for both Muslims and the Hindus. And he always put in his best of the endeavors to bring the unity among them, irrespective of whatever religions or whatever faiths they professed. And he, again, during the course of the speeches, he said that I am the Hindu by birth, Muslim by faith, and Sikh by declaring Sikhism as my religion. So, which means that the cause of unity had been very close to his heart, for which he had been working throughout his life. And he took a very serious note of this unity, and it was his ardent desire and the effort all the time to bring the unity among the Hindus as well as the Muslims. So when I say Hindu and Muslim, the Sikhs are also there, but since he was seeing more conflicts between the Hindus and the Muslims, so that is why in the course of the addresses, he is using more often the words Hindus and the Muslims. So after having released from the jail, Kitchlew remained in jail throughout his life for 14 years, for the cause of the national movement. So after having been released from the jail in 1923, Kitchlew supported the Akali agitation for the Gurdwara reforms, and he plunged himself, wholeheartedly for this agitation. Again, he made the appeal to the Hindus, to the Muslims, and to the other communities that they must come forward to support the cause of the Akalis. And we know that this Gurdwara reform movement had been launched by the Akalis in a non-violent method. This was a non-violent movement, and the civil disobedience movement, had been followed as the program by all the Akali leaders who had organized themselves into the jathas and who were then making different morchas for the release of the Gurdwaras from the control of the Mahants. So Kitchlew had been again making the appeals repeatedly to the Hindus and to the Muslims that they must support the cause of the Akalis. And he asked all the communities to help the Sikhs in their noble cause, in their true cause. To quote Kitchlew, within quotes, we Hindus and Muslims and others who call this our land cannot sit with folded hands, looking at the difficulties our brethren are put to. If you give me 50 or 20,000 Hindus or Muslims all over India, not only the cause of the Akalis would be won, but your own victory, your own independence, your own freedom will be won in no time. So these were the words of unquote Kitchlew. When he had become, the honorary general secretary of all India Muslim League in 1927, Kitchlew participated in various unity conferences which were held between 1927 to 28. And again, he had been espousing the sentiments of the Hindus and the Muslims and the other communities, and he had been working strenuously for the Hindu-Muslim unity during these years. The fact that he always stood for the unity, the fact that the Hindus and the Muslims alike were very close to him, and he treated them with the equal compassion and with the equal sentiments. That becomes clear when we find Kitchlew to be very, very vocal and vociferous in condemning the demand of separate Muslim electorates. So on many of the forums during his addresses, he said that the separate electorates for the Muslims was something which would harm the unity of the Hindus and the Muslims, and this should not be conceded. And in this capacity of being the leader of the Punjab Political Conference in Lyalpur in 1933, and as the president of All India Congress, he issued the circulars condemning the separate electorates for Muslims, for the people of his own community. Then he also condemned in the he stigmatized, and in a very, very vocal terms, he condemned communal award. So he did not like this because, again, there was the talk of giving the separate electorates to depressed classes, and Gandhi went on to the fast for death. And he was also there to condemn this award when the British, they were trying to divide India, that they had been doing always to rule and to perpetuate their rule over India. So this had been a very diplomatic contrivance on behalf of the British, that they had been making the different communities, at conflicting interests, at a sort of war with one another, not in the literal manner, the war word, but they always tried to pit one community against another, and they tried to make the interest of one community fight with the interest of the other community. So they had always come up with one or the other thing in order to, make the communities at the distance. And again, we see that communal award is one such contrivance on behalf of the British, because they were not genuine in giving the constitutional advances to the Indians. They were not ready to give any self-government to the British. They were not ready to give any concession to the Indians. I'm sorry. They were not giving any concession, constitutional concession to the Indians. And the reform agenda, if at all was given, that always came with the riders, whatever acts they passed, whether it's Act of 1909 or 1919 or 1935. So we see that British had always come up with the concession in one hand, but the riders in the other hand. So that had reduced and that had nullified, all the concessions, which apparently looked very, very, fascinating for the Indians. But actually, they did not give the rights, the constitutional rights, to the Indians in the real sense of the word. So he condemned communal award, and then he also condemned the Pakistan Resolution of 1940. So he was against he could not digest this fact that there should be a separate nation which should come up, because all his life he had been pleading for the Hindu-Muslim unity, which had been very, very close agenda to his heart, and for which he had been making all the efforts, right? So he was against the Pakistan Resolution, and then at the time of the partition, when this talk was on partition of India, he was one of the first and foremost leaders to condemn it and to protest the proposal of partition of India. He considered partition as a, within quotes, surrender of nationalism in favor of communalism. So he never wanted that partition should ever take place, and he vehemently opposed the partition. And again, it goes to the credit of Kitchlew that after the partition, he chose to stay back in India and not to migrate to Pakistan. He could do that, and his family stayed here. He himself stayed here, and he had always been working even after that, after staying back in India, for the unity of the people. So after having said all this about Kitchlew, and after having narrated the different aspects of Kitchlew before all of you, I would conclude my lecture by saying, and you would agree with me, that he truly was the catalyst of national unity, the hero of national unity, the soldier of national unity. So you could acclaim him, like this, because throughout his life, he worked for this national unity, which only could make Indians get the independence finally, which only could bring about the political consciousness among the people. He had been trying the Indians, for the larger struggle against the British, and therefore, like all the other Congress leaders, he had also been telling to the Indians, telling the people that they must forget their mutual, interests, because they are drawn into the larger battle, the battle against the struggle against the British that they had to win. So he did not want that the British should succeed in their maneuvers and in their policies and the programs which had been envisaged to harm the interest of the Indians always. And he wanted to get rid of the British yoke as early as possible, for which he had been working. So I would give the tribute to Kitchlew by saying that he was truly the catalyst of the national unity. So thank you very much for listening to my discourse and for being so patient listening it. Thank you very much. Over to the college, Dr. Harmeet, please.
Am I audible now? Am I audible now, madam? Thank you, madam. Thank you for your enlivening and quite interesting lecture on speech on Saifuddin Kitchlew, one of the ardent nationalist leader among Muslims of 20th century India. So we must thank you first for that. And due to technical glitches, we could not even bring to the notice of the audiences and participants your brief profile. Although you don't need any introduction from all of us, as you have been very active and
fine, absolutely fine.
Thank you, madam. And there are certain questions from the audiences, our students, some scholars who are hearing you online. So, if you allow, we can take up.
Sure. I would like.
So, one of the question is, from one of the research scholar of Punjab University of History Department. How do you find the significance of Kitchlew in the present political scenario of 21st century India? Should I read out all the question in one go,
know.
or you will take each one of them?
Thank you very much for sir. If you just mute yourself, will make yeah. So thank you very much for this question. Political scenario, I would say that human nature remains the same, throughout, whether it is 19th century, 18th century, 20th century, 21st century. The only difference that is there because of the conditions and the place where we are there, the time where we are in the present centuries, and we come after a long time, in this century by making so many wonderful changes and all. But as I said, that human nature remains the same. So that means that if at all there was this dishonesty in the previous times, that will remain, the feature of the society even today. Because you cannot conceive a utopian society where all the people are alike, so the nature differs, so that corruption, that bribery, that thing, that always remain. But what is required today is the statesman like Kitchlew, right? There are many politicians in today's scenario, but there are very few statesmen or the states leaders which we require, who should do selflessly and who should serve the country selflessly and should make the best of the endeavors to take the nation ahead. So we need the statesmen like Kitchlew, of course, so that they could do their best to cleanse the system. I know when I call the system comprises of so many people, but then the attempt can be made by the scholars, by the statesmen, and for cleansing the political, scenario, I would say that all of us need to take the voice, all of us need to contribute towards making the political atmosphere conducive for all of us, more honest, corruption free, and other such things. And yes, we need the services of the men like Kitchlew, and we at the same time we also need the services, the honest services of the people, whether they are youth, whether they are educated or they are uneducated people, they are urbanites or they are ruralites, they are men or they are women. So we need the contribution of each one of you to make the political scenario much, much better and conducive for us. That's all. I hope I have satisfied you. Sir, kindly unmute yourself. I can't hear you. You're not audible.
Another question is from one of our honors student from our college. She asks whether Saifuddin ever has any confrontation with Muhammad Ali Jinnah and his supporters during his lifetime.
At least I have not come across this confrontation. So I have read the book of Tawfiq Kitchlew this is the detailed book. His own son has written this. So I have not come across this kind of conflict in this book, which is the most important contemporary source.
We have another question from MA student of our college. Can you just throw some light on the gradual distancing of Kitchlew from nationalist to leftist movement towards the end of God's 1947?
Yes, he was towards the communist, and he had become communist because of the simple reasons, as I told you during the course of my lecture, that when he was suspected and when his program of Tanzim was being looked by the leaders like Madan Mohan Malviya and others, who had already formed the Sangathan, and he said that the Sikh organization also was working for the regeneration of the Sikhs. So he did not find any reason not to start the organization for the Muslims. But that had created some, impressions in the minds of the Hindu leaders that he had become a communalist, and that perhaps was the turning point in his life, that after that he decided to draw to go towards the communist, and his leaning towards the communist had become the established fact. Yes.
Okay, madam, it's probably the last question, or do we have more time? Last question is, please elaborate the role of, last question is also from our student. Please elaborate Saifuddin's role in the formation of Jamia Millia Islamia in Aligarh.
Yes, he has been the founding members of Jamia Millia Islamia. So he has played, because he always wanted to do the best for the Muslims, for the development of their education. And as I told you that he wanted to bring them a far, so that they could avail equal economic opportunities. And in order to spread that education, he had been the founding members of the Jamia Millia Islamia. So that was his earnest effort, so that the best of the education could be disseminated among Muslims, and they should come also up, and their uplift become the established fact. So, yeah.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam, for your opening responses to the queries and questions. So, on the occasion of this 28th March of Amrit Mahotsav of development of our movement, before I like to Dr. Sina for a word of thanks, I will just quote a few immortal words, Amrit words, highlighting the importance of freedom, which is all the philosophy of Dr. freedom. A scholar epictetus is freedom anything else than right to live. Is freedom anything else than the right to live as we wish? Itself is nothing else. So to me, probably freedom is divine, cosmic, cosmogonic, and at every stage of progress, this struggle for freedom remains as important as it was during middle time. Another Muslim Islamic scholar Khalil Gibran, he is of the view, life without body is like a body without a spirit. So let the freedom be of life without liberty is like life, including demand. I would like to hand over the mic to both of you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great honor to express a vote of thanks to everyone who attended this webinar. On the behalf of Postgraduate Government College for Girls Sector 42 Chandigarh, I express my gratitude to Professor Anju Suri, Department of History, for delivering such a vibrant lecture. Her way of style was very sweet and very attractive. Since most of us know little about Dr. Kitchlew, this topic deserves special appreciation. I would like to thank Professor Nisha Agarwal, the principal of this college, for, for giving us permission to organize this seminar. And my thanks is due to Dr. Preeti Shanta, librarian of this department, for making this event very successful. My thanks is due again to my HOD, Dr. Harmeet Sethi, Department of History, for taking initiative to hold this meeting, or hold this event very successful. And thanks to her for her guidance and support in this regard. I am greatly obliged to everyone who attended this webinar by accepting our invitation. I would like to tell all of you that feedback form link has been shared with you in the chat box. Fill it very carefully without any mistake so that your certificate may be generated without any mistake. Be very careful to fill your details like your name, institution, designation, email ID, so that your certificate will be given to you without any mistake. Because this information is a part of your certificate.
Thank you, everyone. And now we are signing off. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ji. Thank you, everyone, Ji. Thank you very much.